Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. If you just bear with us for one moment. Yeah, we have our interpreter on screen there. So thank you very much for joining us. My name is Christabel Feeney. I'm the Director of Employers for Change at the Open Doors Initiative. I'm a white woman with blonde brown hair tied in a ponytail on top of my head this morning, and I'm wearing a patterned blue, pink and green dress with a black blazer over it. Employers for Change, for those of you who might not be very familiar with us, we're an employer disability information service, and we provide advice and information to employers on the area of disability so that they can hire inclusively. And by that, we mean hiring, employing and retaining staff with disabilities. And you can find out much more information about what we do on employersforchange.ie. All of our work and the training that we provide is a free service because we are funded by the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, which you can find out lots more information on employersforchange.ie. Those of you who might follow us on LinkedIn will have seen that yesterday we shared a poll. And in that poll, we asked people what percentage of disabled people actually are living with a non-visible disability. So a disability that you may not be aware of when you meet a person. And the reality is that actually 8% of disabled people have a non-visible disability. And so it's really important that we are raising awareness of these hidden and these non-visible disabilities that people are living with. Today, we're going to talk about how employers can support employees who are neurodiverse. Neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, learning, or behaving. And when we talk about neurodiversity, you know, we're talking about autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and so on. So today we're joined by two speakers, Peter Brabazon and Sharon. Peter Brabazon is the CEO and the General Manager of Specialisterne Ireland. He's a Dubliner, an electric engineer with a diploma in business strategy. He's married with 3 sons, one of whom has Asperger's autism. And in 2012, after 35 years in communications, industrial energy, conservation and education, Peter became a founder and now the CEO of Specialisterne Ireland. It's a social enterprise company and a registered charity. And Specialisterne Ireland, it's a not-for-profit organisation that's a recruitment consultancy, and it really promotes and supports the employment of people with autism and similar neurodiverse challenges. Sharon Lane also took up the role of CEO of Dyspraxia Ireland in 2020. Prior to that, she worked with not-for-profits, local government and state government disability and mental health services in both Ireland and Australia. Sharon is really passionate about employment opportunities for people with disabilities and was a partner in the HSE-led individual placement and support programme, so IPS. Some of you will know that as supporting people with mental health difficulties into open market competitive employment in Ireland, which subsequently then went on to win the HSE Excellent Award for Mental Health Innovation. So as CEO of Dyspraxia Ireland, Sharon has worked with a very wide range of employers and the IDA to really increase awareness of both dyspraxia DCD in the workplace and to advise and support employers who are seeking to provide really meaningful employment opportunities for neurodiverse people. So we're really looking forward to hearing from both of those and the practical steps that they're going to share with us in terms of supporting diverse individuals within the workplace. So to begin, we're going to hear from Peter Brabazon, who's going to share his screen now. And then after that, we will hear from Sharon. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks very much, Christabel. It's a real honor to be here. And I'm just going to share my screen and we'll be off and running, if that's okay with you guys. And here we go. There we go. So I hope you can all see that. Thanks very much for the introduction. So we're definitely talking about inclusiveness and we're talking about exactly as Christabel introduced me, and the topic is we're talking about autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and it's great to see Sharon here as well today, because we very much share a common goal in this area. I'd like to talk about what we do and other groups do in terms of specialist recruitment services and the other services that various people would offer, including ourselves. So typically the candidates that we've got, and apologies, I just see I've dropped a percentage, are male, 70%, female, 30%, and the average age is 24. So we're particularly concentrating on young adults. But interestingly, if you look behind that, a lot of girls are getting diagnosed very late in time. So a lot of the girls that we work with, females that we work with, are much later. In other words, they're a bit older, of the range, late 20s to early 30s. And recently, what we've found is that more and more females are coming to our service. In the first year, it was only 4%. It's now 30%. So, and they're using our service very effectively. In fact, we found females are getting work quicker, which we don't know what that's exactly about. So we'll have to do further analysis on that. Often they're pursuing a qualification or have recently qualified in something. You know, it can be level 5, 6, 7, 8, and right up to 10, in other words, a PhD. But what is happening a lot of the time is a lot of people who we call candidates, who are well educated or good academically, have, because of social issues, never had a job or any work experience in the corner shop or in the bar. So it's a key transition area for us, is to work with the colleges and basically offer service now to 14 campuses around the country, so that we're supporting young people get internships, we're supporting young people then coming out of college to get their first job. Typically, they might be qualified in STEM subjects, that is science, technology, engineering, and maths, but often wider subjects as well. A lot have computer capabilities. You nearly have to nowadays of some form or other for any type of work. But we're finding that we typically have very nice, intelligent people a lot of the time, just think differently, have learned differently, and also, I suppose, are quite humorous, and but maybe quite different in what I would call, or you might determine as being humorous. They're suitable to a range of careers. We're working a lot, yes, with the IT industry, but less so as a total percentage, more with business, like the banks have colleagues from us, candidates from us, general administration jobs, right out to 2 people who work in a PR company. So there's work everywhere nearly nowadays. So, but the issue still is, and it still remains very high, and you probably heard the statistic before, you know, that 85% of autistic people are unemployed. And in fact, their unemployment rate is typically 3 times that greater than other people with disabilities. So it's, as Christabel said, the problem area is really still those with invisible disabilities, which we're talking about today. So what are the issues that we're typically finding? So the barriers to employment, obviously, a key part of that is when a person goes for the neurotypical type interview. They may have poor eye contact. I've interviewed myself people who would only look at the ground or their shoes even, often because they haven't got confidence, and you know, who would blame them, because of social issues, that they undersell themselves, often don't know that they have experiences that would count for the role that they're going for. For example, the typical question is that you might ask is, how do you work in a team? And of course, the team working is, you're imagining it might be in a job or something like that, but actually it could be doing a project in college or something, and that's maybe the only experience that they have in the team. And then you'll find actually they were the candidate who led the particular team of 4 or whatever. So that's the thing. Overall, they cannot necessarily think the same logic that you have. So that's a thing. So sometimes, particularly in interviews, you have to be very clear in your language. The other thing is, unfortunately, in some education routes, some establishments, because of your autism or whatever, you may not have got a good internship, which may have led then to a poor final qualification. And that can hold you back, so you're not given the chance. Whereas I was just recently talking there, before this talk actually, to a company where we placed somebody up in Roscommon, and initially had no qualifications at all. He's now flying it because of his personal interest in computers, which he learned all at home by himself. So there's a lot of issues there for a young person. The other thing, of course, is generally you would be anxious, because we're talking about a young person going for a job. They're all anxious, but you're talking about a young person going for a job who may just have all these sort of other social issues as well. So it's a double issue. And then finally, of course, some people find it strange, but nowadays, so-called stimming, for example, if I'm squeezing this ball, which is a good thing for people anyway with disabilities of all different types, particularly mine. But stimming is quite common, particularly with autistic people. And it's just a natural thing. It's relief of the anxiety. So for it to happen and be allowed to happen is very important, including in an interview. So what we do is with the candidates, we help them to find out what their abilities are. And that is to agree them, because some people undersell themselves. That's very important. Some people obviously oversell, but often underselling, even their families often undersell them. Obviously, then interviews, preparation of CVs, mock interviews, then even a mock interview against an actual job that they're going to get. And some companies now are actually sending out the type of questions that you would get, so that you know when you go to the interview what to expect exactly. Also, one of the other areas can be quite important is how corporate etiquette works. In other words, you can't go to the boss, for example, all the time, every minute of the day when you want to. You sort of have to make an appointment or whatever, that type of thing. And overall, then just to support with actual job applications. Then with the companies, obviously, the first thing often that we would do, we would have what we call an exchange of prisoners. We would have a panel of candidates who are available for work, and we'd be getting from them, we would send to the companies their CVs, and the companies would give us the job descriptions that they have, and we would put up people then. So we would, in the first instance, prepare the interview panel. So it's a non-biased panel, for example. We look at various types of contract options, because different companies employ in different ways. Sometimes it's just internships, sometimes it's long internships leading to a possible fixed term contract. And then also what we like is to have a buddy within the company, and then also then to brief that buddy on what to expect. But the key thing is every neurodivergent person is different. Everybody has their own needs, accommodation needs, quirks, if you want to call them that. And so it's to tell the buddy what to look out for, to brief that buddy and the manager on that, but also just before person is actually onboarded, usually a week before, we like to talk to the co-workers so that they in turn know as much as required just for the job. It's part of the disclosure process that a candidate like ours who didn't like the noise in the canteen didn't go off to lunch with them, and he wasn't being socially inept or anything like that. So they understood that. But in fact, I'm talking about an actual person here, he went on to become their manager, and actually ultimately was headhunted within an international company to another country. And the other thing, and I was glad that Christabel mentioned it, it's about ongoing support, retention. That's the thing. So that's what we're always there for that. Our service is totally free to the candidates. Yes, we have a charge. It's typically like finding any other talent for a company. And yes, there are, of course, supports from the state in this area. So overall, though, when we meet companies for the first time, there is a little bit of fear for various issues. And one of them is, of course, about reasonable accommodations. Now, some of those in the type right there about what you can do about clear communications and all of that. But the one that people worry about is that maybe there's a cost one. That usually the ones are about, if we do a walkthrough audit with the candidate, well, survey really, there's issues like they want to sit near a window, they want to sit away from the light, they want to maybe sit with nobody behind them directly, that type of thing. Very easy things to fix. So they're usually of no or low cost, but the ones that cost, they might things like ear defenders, which are quite typical nowadays for a lot of people, because open plan offices can be a little bit noisy. So support with sensory processing overall, that's what we're talking about there. Also, they may have quietness again at lunch and that type of thing. But one key one is that, particularly in Ireland, is plain speaking, clean language, plain English is key. And this is a benefit to all staff, so because then you set out clear expectations. Because typically, for example, with people with a trait, for example, of autism, need things more or less in black and white. Something like, you might do this where you really mean, please have it on my desk by 3 o'clock. You need to say, please have it on my desk by 3 o'clock. Because an autistic person might put it back to next week or whatever. We use a lot of soft and ambiguous type of language in this country. So, and clear expectations overall. So, how would a company get started with us? We and others would do the same. Manager briefings, obviously. Having a champion who often might become the buddy, obviously identifying a role, and then the matching up service. Because what we are doing, obviously, just as we're working with candidates, we're working with a company to prepare them. We do general awareness things, and we support, if you, the candidate and you wish for us to be in the room with the candidate. But that's not really that frequent nowadays because they're so well prepared. Overall, though, this is not a tokenistic business. What you're doing is, for example, Accenture would say, and they have said this in the document, that it adds to your bottom line. You're paying as a company for a talent, just like with any other person. So that's my piece on building inclusive workplaces. Certainly, if you'd like to ask me any questions after this, please do. And also there, you can contact me directly at my Peter Brabazon at specialisterne.com, or you can look up specialisterne.ie. And if you want to go directly to the employers page, then it's /employers, but you'll find it anyway. It's very easy to find now on our new website. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back to Christabel. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Peter. We really appreciate that, and some really practical information, I think, for people within that on what they can actually do to support people within the workplace. We're going to hear now from Sharon Lane. So Sharon's just going to share her screen for us. And then after that, we'll have an opportunity. I see that people have already started to send in some questions to us. So we should have, about kind of 20 minutes where we will respond to any of those questions. So if there is anything, please do feel free to pop it into the Q&A box there, and we'd be more than happy to go through those at the end. So Sharon, you have your screen shared, so I'll hand over to you there now.
Thank you, Christabel, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to speak to you this morning. My name is Sharon Lane. I'm a female. I'm of a certain age. I have red hair. I'm wearing a black jumper and I have glasses on. And behind me in the background is the Dyspraxia DCD Ireland logo. So I hope it's not causing any light issues coming from behind me. If anyone can't see my screen or if my slides don't move, please do pop it in the chat box and Christabel will let me know. So first of all, Dyspraxia DCD Ireland. We are a member-based organisation. We were established in 1995 as a national representative organisation. We're a registered charity and a company limited by guarantee. So we work across all of Ireland, and we actually do some work in Northern Ireland as well, where they don't have a representative organisation, with young people and adults of all ages. So there's no limit on the age of our service. We work with professionals, we work with education bodies, we work with clinical psychologists, schools, you name it. We will work with whoever we need to work with to advocate on behalf of people with dyspraxia DCD and to raise awareness of this condition. So we support over 2,000 families per year, and we do this through the programs that we run, through our national helpline, and through in-school service delivery. One of the programs we run, as an example, is a very innovative telehealth service, and we developed that during COVID to tackle the lack of service provision to children who were out of the school settings and not receiving any occupational therapy and physiotherapy supports. And that is now going to be piloted around the country. We believe in developing and delivering best practice programs. So all the programs we run are evidence-based, and we're currently working with occupational therapists across the UK and Ireland to keep on developing this best practice model. And as I said, we work with schools, colleges, and other stakeholders as well. So the awareness and advocacy component of our organization is really important. And as employers, I'm sure many of you would say, I'd love to employ somebody who's neurodiverse, but I don't know where to start, or I don't know what supports to give. And we're here to provide those supports to you in whatever way that we can. So for example, this evening, actually, we're running a fashion show. A boutique in Dublin approached us and said, we have a neurodiverse employee. She's an amazing employee, and you've really helped support us over the years. So we're going to run a fashion show as a fundraiser for you. So that's something, you know, that's a really beneficial mutual partnership where we've supported an employer and they want to give something back in return, and the employee is very happy in their space and secure in their employment. So let's have a look at the basics of dyspraxia DCD, and I'll give you, I'm going to go into the terminology in a minute. So dyspraxia, also known as DCD, is a lifelong neurological condition that affects children and adults in the following areas. So fine and gross motor skills, coordination and balance, speech, so verbal dyspraxia, organizational skills, planning skills, including sequencing, memory, and a huge impact on social and emotional skills as the child develops into adolescence and then adulthood. So we know that at least one child in every classroom has dyspraxia DCD. That's a high number. We know it's actually probably closer now that the condition is being recognized. It's closer to 2 children in every classroom. And that's on a scale of significant severity to moderate severity. So in total, 8 to 10% of the population of Ireland is dyspraxic. And it's estimated that up to 70% of people with dyspraxia DCD have at least one other coexisting neurodiverse condition. The most common ones are dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactive disorder. And we would also find autism spectrum disorder coming in there as well. So the more we learn about this condition, the more the complexities are revealed to us, and the more the opportunities to work with the neurodiverse population are presented. So to give you a very quick explanation, because this question comes up all the time, what is it? Is it dyspraxia or is it DCD? So the clinical terminology is developmental coordination disorder, also known as DCD. And that's the term that you would find in clinical manuals and diagnostic manuals to refer to a condition in which an individual has severe difficulties in learning everyday motor skills. And just to expand on motor skills, fine motor skills would be things like coloring inside lines for a child, cutting with a piece of paper. Gross motor skills would be riding a bicycle. Across the range, it might be tying a shoelace, pouring a glass of milk. For a teenage boy or girl, it might be, for a girl, putting on makeup. For a boy, shaving. Very, very common everyday things that you or I would do without thinking, without having to spend additional time processing. But for a person with DCD, there is a need to absolutely focus 150% on the coordination of all of these activities continuously. So the term dyspraxia is used in many different ways by different people, and that does cause confusion. So some people, as you can see, I'm using it here interchangeably with DCD, but other people will say it's more than just DCD. It's more than the organizational skills. There's a huge psychological and emotional component to DCD. And again, the more we conduct research and learn and understand the condition, the more that we can see that as people age. Unlike DCD, there is no internationally agreed formal definition of the term, and it is not included in the DSM-5. And that's why a lot of people won't drop the term dyspraxia, because they say the DSM-5 needs to be expanded to include these additional components. So to give you an idea of some of the famous people with dyspraxia that you might see on a very regular basis, well, appropriately with the Six Nations just over, we have Ellis up there, who played a Stormer for the UK, for England, sorry, excuse me, England. We have Florence Welsh. For those of you in my age group, we've got Toya Wilcox there and Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter. Holly Smale, to the right of Daniel there, is an author who wrote the Geek Girl series. Robin Williams, below him, Cara Delevingne, David Bailey, the photographer. Sorry, Sarah, I'm going very quickly with all the names here. Richard Branson, and one that we took some artistic license with, because obviously DCD wasn't a diagnosable condition back in those days, is Albert Einstein, who couldn't tie his shoelaces until he was 16 years of age. That gives you an idea of the range of people. So sports people, you know, there's a conception that people with DCD can't play sports, and many, many people can't. But then you've got top class athletes, we've got boxers, swimmers, weightlifters. You know, we love to highlight people who are engaged in sports to dispel that particular myth. And we would often have promos on people on our Facebook and social media pages, just to try and get that message out that there is no one size fits all. So as I mentioned, the primary impacts are on gross and fine motor coordination, and that then affects a person's balance, their tone, their muscle tone, but also the tone of their voice and how they speak at times, particularly where they have a strong verbal dyspraxia diagnosis. Sensory processing as well, and that does link into some of the other co-occurring neurological conditions where, as Peter mentioned, it might be light, it might be sound, it might be texture, it might be certain tastes that can really come across very strongly to a person with DCD. And then from that would be the whole areas of self-esteem and image. So you can imagine if you're a child in a classroom and you can't cut out the shapes that your peers can, if you can't color like your peers can, if you can't join in the sports and throw the ball or even do up your shoelace for sports or PE, this constantly attacks the individual's self-esteem and their self-image. And you know, the added impacts there come from the need to try so hard. And that's the one thing I've always found with people with dyspraxia and DCD, is that they try so hard, and that leads to fatigue because they're trying so much harder than their peers. For example, they may only be able to handwrite 10 to 12 words a minute. You can imagine trying to keep up with classwork, take down homework, all of those things when you're trying so hard to keep up with everyone. This leads to anxiety, self-exclusion, and exclusion by others, and reduced opportunities for success as well. So it's very important that we understand how these factors impact. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Christabel. And that we try and mitigate all of these impacting factors as well for people, particularly when they're young, getting in early in those early intervention approaches. So DCD, I'm going to just use the term DCD, is not as widely known as the general population as conditions such as dyslexia or autism. And there, get this, in this day and age, there are no public diagnostic services available for adults in Ireland, none whatsoever. And there's only about 4 or 5 private practitioners who undertake adult assessments. So it's very, very difficult for an adult who suspects, or who somebody has maybe suggested to them that they could benefit from a diagnosis of DCD. It's really hard for them to even get that service. So in recent years, there's been an increasing awareness of the difficulties faced by people with DCD, and thankfully more research has taken place. And it shows that these difficulties don't go away. So again, dispelling the myth that it's something that you grow out of. You don't grow out of DCD. People will continue to have significant difficulties with handwriting and organizational skills, but it's our society that's changing now, and we're using more laptops, we're using assistive technology to far greater effect. Colleges and workplaces, they're all computer-based, and that works for a person with DCD. But there are still challenges such as learning to drive. If you think of all the different coordination skills that are required in learning to drive, a very high percentage of people with DCD don't drive. So that then impacts on their ability to travel for employment and other opportunities. But employment is so critically important for adults and young adults with DCD. And those who are unemployed and underemployed report significantly lower levels of life satisfaction and much higher levels of anxiety and social isolation than those in employment. So if we could go to the next slide. So it just goes to show it's, you know, it's so holistic how we support people. So these are the strengths that people with DCD would be most prevalent in the workforce and in the education system. And this comes from self-reporting, but it also comes from talking to clinicians and teachers and employers. And these are the things that really stand out. Optimism. That's something that, again, that I saw very, very early on working with people with dyspraxia or with DCD. And I've worked in this field for a long, long time. They're so optimistic, they're determined, and they're persistent. They have this amazing problem-solving ability, and it all stems from the need to be able to manage in this world. They're outside the box and forward thinkers because they have to be. They have to always be 2 steps ahead to control their environment. They're great team players, and they're very empathetic, and that stems from an understanding of what it's like to be excluded, and they don't want other people to be in that space, and they have great integrity as well. So all of these skills are so important in workplaces and in building teams. If we could go to the next slide there. So how can employers support staff with DCD? So they can be very simple everyday adjustments that we would all use, you know, using a computer instead of handwriting, using software, something as simple as Outlook calendar to schedule the day, color coding it for different tasks, being able to take regular movement breaks. So just moving around the office, or making a cup of tea or coffee. 5-minute movement break can make all of the difference. Being trusted and being given responsibility that suits the individual's strengths is really, really important. And that starts at a very early age. If a young person in school is not trusted because the teacher sees them as lazy or clumsy or stupid, and unfortunately they are all labels that are associated with DCD, it really doesn't give the person much scope to develop as an individual. So trusting and giving responsibility. And we know that people with DCD make great coaches and team leaders and project managers. They're great front of house staff, customer service and helplines, because of that, that empathy and that willingness to go above and beyond to support others. So we know, again, from universities that the area where most students with DCD would go into in university would include computers, engineering, social services as well as a big one, and the arts. So they would be the main areas that people with DCD choose and excel in. So I think last one, or second last one, please. Next one, yeah. And so what supports are available for employers? And I've worked in this space with employers for a long, long time. And while the goodwill is there and the want to support is there, there's also the practicalities of being an employer with time limitations and financial boundaries and things as well. So there are a lot of, and what I did find was that a lot of employers don't know what's out there for them. And there's a lot out there. So Peter, who spoke from Specialisterne, explained what they can do. We work to support adults with DCD through counselling, through information and advice, and linking them in with occupational therapy. And we also provide workshops and supports to employers. The wage subsidy scheme gives financial support to private sector employers who employ people with disabilities, including DCD. And the employee retention grant is also available. So if you don't know of any of those, please do contact me afterwards and I can give you much more information on that. So if we could go on to the next one, please. Oh, that's it. So thank you. So just to reiterate, there is a lot of support for employers out there. A neurodiverse person, whether it's dyspraxia or DCD or ASD or whatever it may be, a neurodiverse person in your workforce, I can guarantee you, is going to add another layer to your organization. They are going to be an amazing team player. They're going to think outside the box, and they're going to really, really just make you smile, as they do in our organization. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Sharon. And we'll bring Peter back on now as well. We have a couple of questions that have come in. Super. Just pop all of us on the screen here for everybody to see. That was so interesting, really, really interesting. And I think that this is a space that we can see from the amount of people even that are on this webinar. It's an area that people are actually really, really interested in, and employers are very invested in. Certainly you hear neurodiversity being used a lot more in terms of organizations bringing together their employee resource groups. But I think this is really good, give a practical understanding of actually what neurodiversity means, because sometimes people don't fully get what neurodiversity means for an individual. There's a couple of questions here. I'm going to put the first one out there and see which of you might be interested in answering it. Or you both actually, I'd like to get both of your views on this. Would you agree that for the interview process, all candidates should be given questions in advance? I see you nodding there, Peter.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very good idea. And I, to be quite honest, there should be no reason why employers shouldn't do that. The other thing that's often very useful is, and some companies are starting to do it now, is to give a pre-video of what it's like to come to the building and the location, and possibly inside, because that helps. Because I know from my own experience going to a company for the first time, that from bitter experience, you should really give yourself at least half an hour to get there, because it never works out as you think it could. So if you've got all those challenges in your head and you don't recognize the building, etc., that's a challenge, and it's very good for just that walkthrough. And I know a particular museum in the south of the country that sort of gives you a walkthrough as you arrive. And they send it out to, say, school groups, particularly special schools. So they have that in advance, which is a very clever idea. And they just did that off their own bat. So yes, absolutely, I do.
Brilliant. And Sharon, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think from an employer's perspective, you want to get the best out of the interview. So a set of rote questions when a person walks in the door is not necessarily the best way to do that for any candidate. And for a neurodiverse candidate, you're going to have that additional layer of anxiety. They may give you an answer that makes sense to them, but doesn't make any sense to you. So I think you can be missing an awful lot when if a person has to walk in cold to an interview. So I would definitely agree that providing questions beforehand, but more importantly, making it a conversation rather than a set of answer this, answer this, answer this. You really want to delve deeply, and there's a skill involved in that as well for the employer. And there's a lot of supports out there for employers to learn how to develop interview skills for neurodiverse people.
Mm-hmm. And something that jumps out at me there with that too, that we've come across, is oftentimes we have a habit in interviews of asking two questions together, or a double barrel question as well, which is it's a bad habit actually that we get into, but it can be hugely challenging for a person to process, particularly with the stress of none of us like going to an interview. I've never heard anybody say I love going for interviews, because as human beings there's that element of you're being judged, and so it's not the nicest feeling in the world. But then to have these questions that are double or triple barrel and trying to process those must be a huge challenge actually. Another thing I would ask your opinion on that's related to that is, I've seen a lot of companies starting to include, kind of like what Peter said, a piece around the physical movement of the role. And I'm thinking particularly, Sharon, maybe you might have an opinion on this, that it can be very helpful to candidates to actually have a clear understanding of what the physicality of the role requires. So that can be different depending on the job.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of companies would have open days and they would bring the candidates in and they'd show them around. There might be a buddy system in place for the day. And it really, it's so helpful in the candidates being able to sort of comprehend firsthand, this is how it works. And then for themselves, is this something that's going to work for me? And you will find very quickly, particularly with neurodiverse people, that they'll have a great understanding of whether this role is good for them. And so they'll either continue or they'll exit. That saves time for employers as well. You know, so it's a win-win situation. I don't think there's anything that that employers would have to put themselves out to do that would be a waste of time in the interview process for neurodiverse people, but for the general population as well. So yes, there would be additional accommodations that they might require. Certainly if somebody lives in a very rural area and they don't drive, it might be, you know, having somebody in the organization who can help them to understand how to get there, you know, planning to get there, and sort of setting the interview time for a time that runs on a bus schedule or a train schedule, as opposed to, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning when there's no services available. So very, very simple things, even prior to the interview taking place. I know when I worked with people with mental health difficulties, it was a lot of people would be on medication and would be awake at night time and find it hard to sleep. So not having the interview too early in the morning makes a world of difference. You see a totally different person at a different time, and that's not a big accommodation to make.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the accommodations are really so practical. And I think that the initial question is interesting, because one of the first things that we would get asked from employers around, you know, providing questions in advance is, does it provide an unfair advantage? And I think you both said it there, you know, give the questions to everybody. That's, you know, if that's a concern, I don't think that should be a cause for employer not to provide the questions, and it will allow people to bring themselves prepared. I often say to people, I don't think an interview is really meant to be the leaving cert. So it's not meant to be that memory test. But I have a question here, and Peter, I think it speaks a lot to the work probably that you do in particular. So I know of so many companies that will be very accommodating prior to and during the interview, but once the candidate gets the job, the support stops there. What advice do you have to increase that support? So that kind of post-interview onboarding in the job support.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we particularly focus on ourselves. So in a way, we have a contract often with companies, partner companies. We've about 50 partner companies around the country. But exactly as your question has said, a lot of companies walk the talk at the start, but then later on let it slide a little bit and they forget. As we've been around for 10 years, as people have progressed, we've found, for example, various types of glass ceilings put up for our candidates. That's why we support the candidates, because that's totally free service to candidates. But also, if we're supporting candidates, inevitably we're going to end up talking to the company. And what we just because what the first thing that they think is the person beside them is getting promoted or whatever, and we'll walk away. And that's one problem area. The other problem area is change. A lot of the candidates that we work with, and by the way, candidates that we work with do not have to be diagnosed. You know, most are, because it's sort of a process. They then think about who can help me to get work, but a lot aren't. And so what we would do is particularly, it's important to stick with clarity, clean language, and explain why the change is happening. For example, in typical, say in an IT company, technology is changing rapidly all the time. And so, okay, 4 or 5 years, your candidate can be working away, doing more or less the same job, but then it's automated and they have to move on to something else. And the company has to move on to something else to survive. So clear explanation of the reasons. It takes a little bit longer, but by investing in neurodivergent people, that little bit more, they're much likely to stay, they're loyal, and interesting enough, a lot, and particularly the autistic group, are very honest. In fact, you might say too much, you know, so, but that's good because it helps the overall dynamic in a company. And as I said earlier in the presentation, overall, that will help everybody. So clarity about tasks and that helps everybody, but particularly with change happens. And that's where they come back to us, because then there's suddenly an issue. One, for example, a girl working in an IT company, she found that she hadn't got the stamina. I think it was mentioned by Sharon, and she was running out. We just had a conversation with the company. The company had never before done this before. It's one of the biggest companies in the world. They allowed her a shorter week, and that solved the problem. She's actually a junior manager now, which is excellent. And that's the retention thing and staying with them. That there needs to be deliberately a support from the state or whatever for that type of thing. Now, given that there is the retention, what's it called, the employee retention grant, I'm not quite sure if we can bend it in that way. Definitely the other grants in terms of for the company, and this is why they should be doing the wage subsidy support scheme nominally for a company does not end. And it's good because we're talking about invisible disabilities that are with you for life, but with techniques you can manage them maybe yourself, or you can get the support and accommodations from your employer and society in general. This is a societal issue because a lot of people yet, and this is what's good about this today, is don't understand the ins and outs of this. And to be honest, groups like ourselves, we are always learning about the best way to support our candidates as well. Sorry, I've gone on a bit there.
No, and I agree with what you're saying. And actually, one thing that jumped out at me in terms of supporting the employers to support individuals is we relaunched last year a revised reasonable accommodation passport with IBEC and the Irish Congress of Trade Union. And for anybody that's on this, that's a manager or an employer of any kind, I would strongly recommend that you go on to the Employers for Change website. And you can search for that, the reasonable accommodation passport, and you'll see that there. Because like what Peter said, the continued support and the consistency of support is very important actually for retaining staff. And that document sets out examples of the types of questions that you can put forward to individuals so that you can acknowledge and understand any barriers that exist, what accommodations are required, and it also means that there's a review process so that they know that if something changes, if that isn't working anymore, or if they need something different, they know they can go to the manager and that they can make that request. So I think listening to Peter and Sharon, a big part of this is actually the communications. And for people who are neurodiverse as well, even on the first day, finding out what's their preference around communication, because that can also act as a barrier to individuals. Sharon, you kind of spoke a little bit about this at the end of your presentation, and somebody has put a question in. The person has mentioned that they themselves were diagnosed with dyspraxia nearly 2 decades ago, that they found the support scheme in Ireland quite poor. Throughout school and college, nobody really seemed to understand it. So they're asking, what kind of supports are available these days to people in the workforce? And where is best to go to get a better understanding of DCD or dyspraxia?
Okay, so there's your double barrel question.
I'm just going to say it's 2 questions. So the first part is
okay.
the support. Yeah, but I know I had it read and I said this is actually exactly what I just said people should not do.
That's okay. So I did see that question there. I had a quick read through that question there, and to the person who wrote it, you know, I really would like to say to you that there have been, even in my short time here, there have been significant advances in awareness of the condition through schools, not so much through employers, unfortunately, but certainly in schools. Primary schools are great, and universities are great. We still have a lot of work to do at the secondary level. If you're in employment, so I noticed also there's a number of references to employability companies there. And employability companies work with people across a range of disabilities, and they provide one-to-one supports. They provide benefits counselling, which is really important if the person is in receipt of a disability payment. And they provide employer supports. So you don't have to have an employee to go and talk to an employability company and say, can you tell us what we might be able to get financially and in terms of other supports if we take on a person with a disability. So they're located right across the country, and I know we've worked with them, and I think Peter has as well on a number of occasions, and they're great. That's their job and that's what they do. So I think that's certainly something that we didn't have a number of years ago. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's so much more to do in the space of DCD itself. But I think with people being able to self-advocate as well and being able to disclose that they have a disability, that there is, you know, every single person who comes forward and says, I have DCD, this is what I need. If they want someone to help them talk to their employer, again, employability companies, their key worker there could do that. We can do that. Specialisterne can do that. AHEAD, who work in the space of further education and employment for people with disabilities, they have a great graduate program called Willing Able Mentoring, and that supports the person over a period of time in the workforce as well. So again, there's lots and lots out there. I would say have a look at our website and certainly contact us, and we can give very specific information to people as well.
Super, that's great. And I think you mentioned it there. If anybody is looking to find out more information about DCD dyspraxia, you're the organisation, like they can go. There's lots of information, as you said there.
So there's not alone on our website, but we have a YouTube channel as well. And sometimes videos tell you so much more than, you know, you don't want to read static information all the time. So there's some very good videos there from, you know, ranging from employment to fatigue to physical health, mental health. So it covers the spectrum.
Super. And yeah, I think there's a couple of you that have mentioned about employability, and it is a great service. There are different employability services in different parts of the country and different counties. So if anybody wants more information on that, there's a section as well on the Employers for Change website under further support, and you can find links to that. Another person here, and Peter, you might answer this, is wondering what the process is for getting diagnosed for ADHD or autism as an adult.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not great. Access through the public sector, I don't have the details, depends where you're living exactly. I can get those details. So if you actually, in general, this might be a point as well, you could send on the questions to us afterwards, if that's possible.
Sure.
We just look at the ones that are relevant. Some, I don't think there's a time we would answer them all. I just had a look, and that's what some of them are. The first thing is, of course, that you come to us anyway. That's you know, because often people nowadays come to us because they feel they are, or somebody has told them that they might be, or it runs in the family anyway. You know, we've had that just the other day with the girl whose 5 siblings had one form, from dyspraxia to autism and everything. You know, so that's it. So we will come back. Obviously, you can go down the private route as well, and even that is expensive. But it's a barrier currently in Ireland, you know, just general medical services and getting access to it. We had one guy yesterday with dyslexia. He's been waiting forever, but he's now working and everything. So he's gone through the process, you know. And one girl who worked for us as particularly in the communication side of things, and now works for the Gardaí, she never got it down in Cork Kerry area. So there's only one person who's actually doing it as part of the public health service. So it's a challenge, and but I'd certainly see what we can get. And if that person would like to get onto me at Peter Brabazon, I'll follow up on that with them. That's Peter Brabazon at specialisterne.com. Sorry.
Yeah, and we will share with anybody that registered for the event. They're going to get a copy of your slides after this, and the contact details for both organisations. If there's anything that we've mentioned, I know that somebody's asked about a company Sharon mentioned there, we will add in any of those extra bits of details. We have a lot of questions there, so what I'm going to do is I've taken a copy of those and I will follow up on them. I'd just like to finish by asking each of you, if there was one piece of practical support that an employer who's not sure how to support employees right now, if there's one thing that they could do today that could really impact their neurodiverse employees, what would it be? So I'll start with you, Sharon.
I think be open to change. There's many wonderful people out there trying to make a difference in companies large and small, and many of these companies, I'll say, are somewhat tokenistic, and others don't have the resources, and so they close their minds off to it. But at the end of the day, open your mind, be open to change, and think about how you can do things differently, because you need to, as employers, to attract the workforce of the future. This is really important stuff. It's not only for people with disabilities, but it's for the workforce of the future. Change how you do things.
Brilliant. And you, Peter?
Well, first, I suppose to employers generally, look, this pays. So it comes to the bottom line. You need people who are neurodiverse to think for you and work outside the box for your company's survival in the long term. And just as Sharon was saying, then go out and listen, ask for advice from any type of group like ourselves, whatever your own groups, Christabel, because how do you eat an elephant bit by bit? If you just start, there's loads of advice out there. The employability services are excellent around the country. We work with them an awful lot. Even the Intrio offices, very, very good as well. And a lot is happening. And more and more, if your child is still in school and that, a lot more teachers are now getting some training in this area in a number of the colleges as well. So there's a lot of advice. So yes, be open, and you never know. It can be a fantastic experience, as a number of people have found, a number of companies have found. And this company I'm sitting at present has a program called Autism at Work itself. It has the program now worldwide.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, and thanks very much, Peter and Sharon, for taking the time to speak to us today. As I said at the start, I think the number of people who have joined this webinar is a real reflection on the appetite amongst the employer community to learn more. And I think awareness and knowledge building and really understanding is a huge part of removing the barriers that individuals face, both to employment and to sustaining employment. You both mentioned the importance of including neurodiverse talent within the organisation to actually have a good business model. And I think that should be a huge talking point for employers. If we were to think about disability generally, it impacts over 76% of consumers. So for any employer out there who has a consumer-facing role, it doesn't make good business sense whatsoever to not be inclusive of people with disabilities. We also know from a 2018 Deloitte report that actually employers who were true disability inclusion champions had a 28% higher revenue over a 4-year period than those who weren't. So the statistics are there. This is a reality. It's a very natural part of people's lives. And it's really important for organisations to be successful that they are think I got cut off there when I was in full spiel. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. It's been a really enjoyable discussion. I've learned a lot from listening to both Peter and Sharon. I also want to thank Sarah, who's our ISL interpreter today, because me in particular has spoken definitely too quickly, but she's done a great job, and we really, really appreciate it. Thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.